Hello, I am Jordan. So recently, Michael K. Vaughan put up a video on his channel called, I believe, "Do We Even Need Book Critics?" And then, of course, Steve Donahue made a response video um, regarding the same question. And I thought I would kind of uninvited throw my own kind of thoughts in because it's a very fascinating discussion, obviously, and it's something that seems to come up on BookTube every once in a while and it never really goes anywhere, which of course it can't. It's an unresolvable question, I think. But I think they both made some fantastic points, and I think really more or less they're in agreement, and I think largely I agree with them myself. There is one kind of larger question, kind of wrench I want to throw into the spokes near the end. I'll get to that, but basically I feel like the conclusion at least that Michael K. Vaughan came to was that yes, in fact, we do need book critics because they provide something that um, amateur readers cannot provide, right? Which is experience and kind of a workmanship like ability to understand the ways that prose can and should work. The word should there is probably a little controversial, but I think Steve would agree with that, right? I think his point is that book critics have this expertise. They are devoted to this. It's their profession, and so they are operating on a level as readers that the average lay reader is not, or at least is not consistently. And I think that that is largely true. I think Michael K. Vaughan brings up a fantastic point in that critics are so often so wrong. I think of the three examples he himself brings up, I have not read The Western Writer, but I do enjoy Lovecraft and I do enjoy King, and I think he's absolutely right that these are writers that are often misrepresented and underappreciated by critics. And I mean, Michael K. Vaughan himself admits Stephen King as a writer has enormous problems, and I would admit that as well. But I think it's a mistake to assume that those problems are indicative of his entire body of work, or even any given novel of his in its entirety. I feel like of his novels that I've read, there are quite a few that are like objectively bad, but there are also quite a few that have a magic to them, and that's a skill, and that's objectively uh, good or valuable. Although we'll be getting to that idea of value a little later too. But I also wanted to bring up three other examples that are perhaps a little less controversial of writers who are or have been underappreciated by critics. So, first of all, Wuthering Heights, which is my favorite novel. As I understand it, received very, very negative reviews, largely. I think there were a few exceptions, but for the most part, it received negative reviews when it first arrived on the scene. The same could be said for Moby Dick, received bad reviews mostly when it was released, I believe. And then Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman just was utterly panned, like in a very vicious, mean way. And all three of those books now, I think you would embarrass yourself as a critic if you suggested that they were bad books. And yet people were passionate about these being unsuccessful books at the time. And there are more examples, obviously. And even continuing today, I think that there are many writers who are underappreciated by critics who will go on to be very, very remembered. In the case of Steve Donahue, famously, he is very passionately, he's a passionate attacker of the works of Cormac McCarthy, um, which brings me to a kind of another negative side of book criticism is that I think many critics have blind sides, right? Or, and perhaps even intentionally self-inflicted blind sides because I believe Steve would say that there is nothing of value in any of McCarthy's books, which is objectively false, right? If you open any of his books at random, or not any, but like say Blood Meridian or The Crossing or Suttree, if you open them at random, you will likely find instances of just intensely evocative, effective prose, or just pitch perfect, hyper realistic, utterly convincing dialogue. You will find that all over his best books. And which is not to say he's perfect. He does have bad books just like King does. But certainly there are aspects of his best books that I think it would be ridiculous to deny. Um, but again, I'm not trying to. This is not a video of me defending McCarthy. What I'm trying to say is that critics are often wrong, and it's a mistake to view them as a kind of a gold standard for what you're willing to read. And I don't think even Steve would say that you should. He says himself often that liking something and seeing it as objectively good are two totally separate things. Um, and I agree. What I think critics offer is a mode of reading that does have its value, right? So they are experts in a certain attitude towards literature that can be extremely rewarding. I would probably argue that the critical attitude towards literature is the most rewarding attitude to take as you read a book because you just get more out of it. It enriches you in a way that reading pulp for fun, while there's nothing wrong with that, it doesn't give you the same kind of. It's just a much more shallow experience, I think, as perhaps pretentious as that sounds. So the critical community offers a kind of um, a refined place in which to kind of to discuss and to dig into books in this way. And if we didn't have the critical community, that way of reading would be relegated to academia, right? Which I think would be bad because academia is famously out of touch. And really only it's just so cloistered and kind of self-digesting. Which is not to say it doesn't have anything to offer on its own, but bringing critical approaches to literature into the public sphere of the general public through the the vehicle of book reviews is important, right? Because myself as a reader, um, I enjoy reading books from that perspective, and I am an amateur. I'm not an expert at it. So reading a person who is very experienced in that approach to reading, it enriches my experience as well. But I do think you really have to be careful in terms of putting all of your stock in that because critics are often wrong, for one, and two, they often, I think, lose sight of um, popular appeal, like Michael K. Vaughan was bringing up in regards to Stephen King. Who are you going to believe, right? This is a writer who is one of the most successful writers in human history, deeply loved by people. It's not simply that he's loved for his name's sake only, right? People read his books for the first time and fall in love with them, and that happened to me as a young reader. And it happens to people of all ages and all walks of life. So I will just repeat what Michael K. Vaughan said. Who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe people who um, shit on King and say that he has no value? Or are you going to believe the vast numbers of readers like you who say he does have value? So I think it's a mistake to lose sight of the power of popular appeal, especially in a writer like King. But all of that being said, as I was thinking about this, more and more I kind of came to the conclusion, or I came to a very prominent doubt that I have often when I think about these things, which is not so much do we even need um, book critics, it's do we even need books, right? This is it's a tempest in a teapot or whatever, the tempest in a teacup thing. Um, Books don't matter. I think I'm confident in saying that books don't matter, and a critical approach to books necessarily assumes that they do matter, that this is an important thing that needs to be dissected on a level that, um, lays bare all of the things that it's doing because it matters so much, but it doesn't, right? Books do not matter. Art does not matter. Art is a luxury. It is entertainment. That's really all it is. I think you'd be hard pressed to come at me with any other definition of art other than entertainment. Which is not to say that entertainment is bad at all. Like, I know me, for example, if I was not a reader, I mean, I can't even imagine what my life would be. It's just such a huge part of my life and always has been. It's something I would never, ever want to give up or feel inclined to give up. But it's entertainment, right? It's not helping anyone necessarily. It's not providing any utilitarian function. It's simply a means of passing time in a semi-enriching way. So I think keeping that in mind, critics start to look even less, perhaps, important than they are. Um, so, anyways, I mean, I hate to end on a down note, but I feel like my main kind of point here is that yes, we can have these discussions about the experience of reading and the various ways to engage with a book, and the values that those different approaches can have. But at the end of the day, we're talking about something that is um, quite trivial in the scheme of things, right? It's simply entertainment, and I don't believe um, that there is anything truly transcendental about it to the point that warrants taking it extremely seriously. And there are some days when I would probably disagree with that, but right now that's kind of where I'm landing on the issue. So I'm curious as to what you guys think. Essentially, first of all, do you think we need book critics? Again, I say I do, but with the caveat that, well, we don't really need books anyway. But what do you think? Do we need books? What purpose do books serve? Do they need to serve a purpose? It's just a fascinating question. I don't find it all that disturbing to come to the conclusion that we don't need them, because I don't feel like that takes away from the joy I get from them. But I just I'm inclined to believe that they are essentially, like I said, a luxury, a digression, kind of. But anyways, that's my thoughts. I wasn't particularly coherent, but I gave it my best shot. Let me know what you guys think, and I will leave a link to both of those guys' videos down below. You should go check them out for sure. And thanks for watching. Have a good day.